My sincerest apologies to the conspiracy theorists out there, but JJ McCarthy is going to start against the Lions, and the whole season is going to take on a new tenor. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. You'll make the world go round. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today on the show, Vikings didn't play Sunday. You might have watched a lot of things happen. Bears losing, Packers winning against the Steelers, and so on. But I figured today would be a great day to go over the main talking point of the entire season, especially from the national side, which is, oh my God, the Vikings so botched this. Look how good Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones are playing, and how, much of a mess they're in, especially as Carson Wentz, falls apart in front of them, and you go, yeah, that could have been Daniel Jones, right? And now look how good he's playing. I want to really interrogate that. And here in Locked On Vikings, you can very easily look at the stats and see how well Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones are playing, no matter how advanced of stats you want, right? If you're like a box score guy, you can probably get about the same conclusion as if you look at the more advanced stats that I typically tend to prefer. Those are not exactly difficult questions, and every stat gets them right. But I think that seller's remorse thing is probably worth addressing, and we have a bit of a chance to address it. So we can kind of attack that from a few angles, but the first one is that JJ McCarthy is going back into the lineup against the Lions. According to Tom Pelissero, according to the local beat, he is expected to play. He's been on this track for a 4 to 6 week injury, which turned into a 6-week injury, to be over now, and barring some kind of setback or something else, it's going to be JJ McCarthy. It puts to rest the conspiracy that I don't think really got a lot of traction outside of social media and, your area shock jocks, but the conspiracy that the injury was made up and they're just going to keep delaying it because they're so upset with, they're so dissatisfied with JJ McCarthy that as bad as Carson Wentz is, they're going to keep just throwing him out there. No, Carson Wentz may now rest in a hospital bed considering how beat up he got against the Chargers. And it's going to be JJ now against the Detroit Lions and a very good defensive line there. But also a banged up secondary that also was struggling to begin with all their starters. So it's going to be an interesting game, and we'll get to that when it comes to crossover Thursday and stuff. But I think when we get to a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, this whole soft benching narrative will largely be as forgotten as it should be. And if you really got wrapped up in it, you're lucky that everyone's going to forget it was a thing. And as stupid as you feel right now, or maybe as stupid as you look right now, maybe you're still in denial, it's going to fade. And ultimately, this will just kind of be a blip in the radar. And 2-3 years from now, the narrative on JJ McCarthy will be determined by something that hasn't happened yet. There is hope in that, considering the Vikings are on a very ugly 2-game losing streak. The game against the Chargers was bad enough to basically have everybody bump them into the high 20s on their power rankings, and deservedly so. We're talking about which coach should be fired now. I mean, this is a bleak time in Minnesota, but the vibes can so turn around. And this is one of the things that I think we could all get better at is trying not to get too wrapped up in the moment. And what I have said about the Chargers game so far, I mostly kind of took the weekend away from football, but So I haven't added much to what I said immediately pregame, but I don't take any of that back. I think that the Vikings are truly in crisis. I think that was what I titled the podcast episode, and a few people were mad about it and thought it was a little bit too much. But I do think that the Vikings are kind of in a big downward spiral, and to save their season and maybe someone's job, depending on who you are, they probably need to re-examine every decision that they've made so far and which decisions they want to stand by and which ones they want to maybe change moving forward. So I stand by that. However, and this is why I ended the show on Friday the way that I did, fast forward a month, how are you going to feel? It's not going to be defined by the Chargers game. It's going to be probably defined by whatever the last game was. That's the nature of the NFL, and in all of its beauty, the most important game is the next one. As fun as it was to dunk on the Bengals by 37 or whatever they won that game by, you still had to go into Ireland and win the next game, and you didn't, and all that goodwill fell away. And it works exactly the opposite, right? Go back a week. You felt terrible after the Atlanta game. You felt a little better after the Bengals game. You felt not great after the Steelers game. They win the Browns game. It feels a little better. You feel awful now. You go into Ford Field and steal a game. All of that melts away. And suddenly you're 4-4 and ascending. Maybe we're thinking about the playoffs again. Maybe we're thinking about the division again. Not even that far out of it. And there's a lot of season left to go. That is why it is so important that J.J. McCarthy comes back now, because J.J. McCarthy still represents at least some unknown. We have seen 2 games of him, and it wasn't particularly impressive. But those 2 games are a very small sample. He's now had a little sabbatical to kind of, reflect on that and try to learn what he can learn, and hopefully approach the next games with that bounce back that he's so famous for, and see if you get more, right? Now, if he shows up in Ford Field, lays an egg, everything's terrible, and he throws 3 interceptions, we got to have some real serious conversations, and I don't think everybody survives that in Minnesota. I think people start getting fired if the quarterback... everybody ties their career to the quarterback, right? If the quarterback's that bad off the bat, people get fired. But if you... Again, I'm asking you to zoom out a little bit from the context of your team and their last game. That's not the world. And I think we act like it's the world sometimes. The whole world is terrible when your team loses and loses that bad. But other teams had worse days, more disappointing days. Other teams have had, devastating injuries that make them feel really bad, right? Other teams are having way worse seasons. The Jets just won for the first time. Imagine that. How would you feel? Your team will play other games and they will get their chance to bounce back. That's really important. But one of the main topics of this whole season has been about if the Vikings botched it, right? Should they have gone with Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones or Aaron Rodgers, those 3 guys in particular? I'm not sure that I can really get into that seller's remorse from just a principle standpoint. You are who you go to war with the army you have. It is kind of a principle of mine. And while we can go, woe is me that they didn't have this guy or that guy, or woe is me, this 3rd round draft pick is going crazy and they could have picked him in the 2nd round. You can kind of do that every year with every team, and it's no longer meaningful. It's the Terry McLaurin rule, right? Terry McLaurin goes in the 3rd round. Everybody's 2nd round pick feels bad. Vikings picked Irv Smith Jr. over Terry McLaurin. Every other team can say some version of that, except for the Titans who got A.J. Brown, and they don't feel good about A.J. Brown now because they traded him away. So nobody gets to feel good about their 2019 2nd round pick now because Terry McLaurin exists. That's probably not a good heuristic. So I can't really get involved with that, but it's also just a principle. Maybe they could have, but they don't. And and to me, I find a much more productive conversation by going with, okay, who do they have and how do they get better with this? But we're on a mini bye. We're not recapping a game right now. So we have a chance to kind of address that because it's been such a big talking point. I can get there. So that's what we're going to do next on Locked On Vikings. We're going to go into those 3 quarterbacks and ask, how really would it have been if Sam Darnold stayed? If Daniel Jones had stayed, if he had taken the, and what prevented them from doing that. We got some reporting from Tom Pelissero, which is not new, but was importantly reiterated on the Rich Eisen show this weekend. And then, of course, the Aaron Rodgers thing as well, and how that happened this offseason. When we get a little distance from all these things, I notice some people characterizing it incorrectly. And I'm not talking about like in a subjective way. I'm talking about like literally mischaracterizing what happened objectively. So I want to make sure that I'm super clear about what the reporting says happened. And if you don't believe the reporting because it's all a big conspiracy, you're beyond help. But I'm just talking about like what has been reported that happened from the reputable people that we tend to trust. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Look, you make decisions every day. And you got takes. I know you have takes. You all have opinions. You let me know about them constantly. But if your opinions turn out right, you can do more than just jump into a podcaster's YouTube comments. You could get paid. So don't miss any of that excitement. Get in on some of that action. And y'all are smart, so put a little bit of money where your mouth is. If you haven't tried it yet, PrizePicks is the simplest way to play daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to put in a play, and you can play anywhere PrizePicks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. PrizePicks has been my main squeeze as a California resident. I've been super excited to get involved in it, and I've been having all kinds of fun this year. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rugiet. Fellas, you've probably heard of pills like Viagra or Cialis. Rugiet takes things another step. Making excuses doesn't solve anything, and you've maybe had to use them before. I'm stressed out, I'm tired, or no, it just happens sometimes. But when it comes to performance, sometimes your body just needs a little extra support, and that's where Rugiet comes in. It offers fast-acting, doctor-prescribed treatments for ED designed to help you stop making excuses and start making moves. Visit Rugiet, that's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL to get 15% off of your first order. And all you have to do is go to that website. You'll connect with a board-certified doctor, 100% online. So no waiting rooms, in-person conversations, or any of that. It's all online with the benefit of being in your own home. And if prescribed, your treatment ships directly to your door. It's fast, simple, and private, and everything is handled by real doctors. Once again, that is RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL. And don't forget to use code LockedOnNFL so they know we sent you. Rugiet, stop making excuses and start making moves. Moving on with the Locked On Vikings podcast. So there are really 3 names we bring up, and I think a 4th that should be that isn't, when it comes to what could have been at the quarterback position here in Minnesota. And I want to preface this by pointing back to the last segment and saying, look, it's JJ McCarthy, and there's nothing we can, and there's nothing any of us can do about that now. It's JJ McCarthy, and if the Vikings are smart, it's JJ McCarthy no matter how bad he is for a few years. You got to give these quarterbacks a little bit of time to figure it out. And I think we're looking around the league, and the theme of this league right now, the theme of this season of the NFL has been, maybe we shouldn't have written that guy off, right? From Baker Mayfield to Sam Darnold to Geno Smith, who's now old enough to actually be in his decline, to Daniel Jones. All of those guys are, maybe we shouldn't have written them off in their original team, right? The Jets are feeling worse about this. I can promise you that. The Giants are feeling worse about this as they watch their year circle the drain. It's still worth looking at. Let's just play the what if game. What if the Vikings had kept Sam Darnold? Let's start there. Sam Darnold playing great in Seattle. I have really no reason to believe that what he would do in 2025 in Minnesota would be similar to what he was doing in 2024, which was awesome, which had a few little negatives that were greatly outweighed by the positive. We would have been probably pretty satisfied with that. It would have undoubtedly been better than what they have gotten before, and their record would have undoubtedly been better than what they have now. I feel really confident in that, and I don't think many of you are going to argue. The downside would be that you would have made a commitment. To get Sam Darnold to stay, you would have had to make a commitment of a 3-year deal. That's what Seattle did for Sam Darnold. And if Minnesota had offered that 3-year deal, not necessarily the money, they would have, I believe Tom Pelissero went on the Rich Eisen show and reported that the Vikings did make Sam Darnold a competitive offer. So it was around there, but it was a 1-year deal. It was another kind of trial deal because the Vikings wanted to go with McCarthy. So for the Vikings to land Sam Darnold and coax him away from the Seattle deal that gave him more security and a longer term commitment, they would have had to match that commitment. So essentially you would have had to say, hey, JJ, great preseason. You got hurt. This dude was great. Bye. They probably would have had to trade away JJ McCarthy, sight unseen, basically, and commit to Sam Darnold. And I think in hindsight, it's really easy to say, well, of course they should have done that. But I want you to, again, think of it in a context where you don't know. What if the Titans did that with Cam Ward right now at the deadline? That would be insane, right? What if they signed free agent? Let's say, put it this, there's actually a great world where, let's say the Colts can't get something done with Daniel Jones for whatever reason. He hits the market. The Titans signed Daniel Jones. He's had one good year that stands on top of a career of not being as good. But that 1 year was so good, we're going to give him a 3-year deal and trade away Cam Ward. Would you think the Titans were doing a good thing? I mean, and you know more about Cam Ward than you know about JJ McCarthy, right? But no matter how things end with Cam Ward, who, by the way, I super like what Cam Ward has done, even though it statistically has been like up and down. He's made a ton of bozo plays, but he seems really fun, and I really hope he can kind of pull as he like matures into the league. I think he could be a really, really, really fun quarterback. I'm super pulling for him. But if the Titans signed a free agent like Daniel Jones this offseason, traded Cam Ward away for probably peanuts, right? 3rd or 4th round pick for the guy they just took 1 overall after a year, you would probably be like, what are they doing? Like, think about how unreasonable that is and how unreasonable in hindsight you were expecting the Vikings to have been. Do you still expect them to have done that? I don't really expect them to have done that. But that doesn't like line up with how much better things would have been if they had done that. And I guess you have to make of that what you will. For me, I just kind of can't be that upset about it. Like, you were never going to do that. So why would I mourn something that was never going to happen, right? I'm not upset that the Vikings didn't draft Peyton Manning in 1998 either. That was never going to happen. They were a playoff team and he went first over. Like, I'm not regretting that. That would be a really weird thing to regret. And because that would be weird to regret because you wouldn't have gotten Randy Moss in that situation. And the same kind of logic applies to to a lot of those like missed draft regrets kind of thing. And the same logic applies a little bit with Sam Darnold, where they would have paid $30 million a year. You probably are saying goodbye to a lot of free agents. You're probably starting to cut older players a lot. Again, I think that maybe could have worked out. And I think that Sam Darnold, if you're going to regret someone, is the one worth regretting. But it just feels like you would have had to know how the future would happen to even consider making this move, because I think some unlikely outcomes have come to pass and you would have had to like see that coming. I don't think it's fair to expect them to see it coming in the way that it has. And it's also not fair to like call it now, right? And say this definitely would have been better. Because again, I fast forward for me. Let's look into a future. What if the Seahawks get eliminated wild card weekend? Do you still feel that much regret? They just made it as far as Sam Darnold did last time. Do you still feel that much regret? I don't know if you do. But let's move on to Daniel Jones, because this is a different situation, and I think it's a much more interesting one, honestly, because the Vikings gave an offer to Daniel Jones that at the time was reported to be bigger than the offer that he took with the Indianapolis Colts. It wasn't by much. It was pretty close. But like the Vikings offered to Daniel Jones was about the same. They did try to keep him, but he said no. And he said no because he liked his odds to beat Anthony Richardson in a competition better than his odds to beat JJ McCarthy in a camp competition. It probably would have been a more serious camp competition than what we got with like Sam Howell. But, and considering how Daniel Jones is playing now, I do think there's a world where he wins that competition. He's playing phenomenal ball. He might have taken it. But it would have become a moot point anyways, because if JJ McCarthy did get anointed to start and then he gets hurt in week 2 the same way, Daniel Jones comes in for these last 5 weeks. I think the Vikings have a better record. I think they have a much better offense, of course, than they do with Carson Wentz. And we would have, I think, a real version of the QB controversy that people have tried to manufacture with Carson Wentz that has truly never even been close. And I will not hear otherwise. Carson Wentz never did anything remotely close to what he would have needed to do to make the Vikings consider playing him over JJ McCarthy, regardless of the statistical discrepancy between the two right now. He's played like cheeks and has been treated as such. He was a sacrificial lamb in LA, and you're never going to convince me otherwise that he wasn't just out there to take bullets. Things may have been different with Jones. Maybe he plays really, really well in the Euro trip. Maybe he beats the Eagles and you're going, oh my God, I think we have to ride the hot hand here. And it would have been a much better argument. And this moment where now, okay, JJ McCarthy is healthy, but the Vikings could be like 4-1 or something through this stretch with Daniel Jones. And you're going, whoa, this is actually kind of hard. I think it's fascinating, and I genuinely don't know what you would do in that situation. We would probably need to know a lot of details. I'd be making Patreon videos comparing the two and going, I think you maybe have to go with Jones. Like, I would have been way more open to that idea, considering how well Daniel Jones is playing in Indy if that happened here. But what would you have had to do to make Daniel Jones come here? You would have had to overturn the whole thing. You would have had to tell him, no, we'll start you over JJ McCarthy. And again, you would have had to basically put McCarthy away forever. I'm not talking about like, you would have had to like make a commitment here to say, no, Daniel, like you're our guy now. And you would have had to basically take the guy that played one decent preseason and got hurt and put him away. What needs to happen after Aaron Rodgers is, I guess, even harder to figure out, and it probably wouldn't have worked for a different reason. But these are not the regrets I think we should have about the Vikings offseason, which has turned out horribly, but just about stuff that we're not really talking about nearly as much. So I'll get into all that next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets to games. The Vikings are going to play a little more at home now. They've gotten a lot of their road games out of the way, and they will finish with quite a few home games. So if you want to get to a game, now is the time, and Gametime can help you get there. Look, Gametime can help get you in the door for, let's say, Ravens at Vikings. That's the next one. Big ticket team, probably Lamar Jackson coming to town. They can get you in the door for $142 a ticket. And if you just have a group of two and you want really good seats, I'm looking at the app right now, and I see, what is that, 7th, 8th row seats for $365 per at US Bank Stadium. That is an insane deal. No, 307. It's even better. Or if you want to get all the way to like the end zone, you can go like 272 a seat. You can, or if you are, again, if you're willing to go up, you can get all the way into the hundreds. At US Bank Stadium, those are incredible prices. That's the kind of thing you can find with Gametime. It gives the advantage back to fans, so you don't have to worry about queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout. All those prices I just said are fully, all fees included, what you actually pay at checkout. So if you want to get in on that, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. This episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Look, if you're like me, you always want to have a little bit of extra something when the Vikings aren't actually playing. So we've got the Commanders visiting the Chiefs, what maybe could have been the Super Bowl in a different alternate universe. And this would be a rematch of it, but the Commanders are in such a bad way that the Chiefs are favored by 11.5. And if you think that that is not enough for the Chiefs, too much for the Chiefs, you can get involved with FanDuel. And right now, even if you miss the start of the game, or you just want to try to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score to fourth quarter comebacks. And you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Moving on with the Locked On Vikings podcast. So I see a lot of people talking about Aaron Rodgers all the time, especially when he's on primetime and you're actually watching him, because a lot of times he's playing at the same time as the Vikings and all the Vikings fans miss what he did. And then they see that what he did in the game wasn't all that remarkable, and the point doesn't really materialize. But this is one that I think we can really put to rest. I feel really confident saying that if Aaron Rodgers was in Minnesota, it would be a mess. And it's going pretty well in Pittsburgh. It would not have gone that well here. And here's the reason. And from what I saw of that Packers game, which I did not see the entire thing, but from what I understood of that Packers game from where I am, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Packers did a good job of making Aaron Rodgers hold the ball. The Vikings did not do that. That was a huge difference between the two games. They did a good job of making Aaron Rodgers elongate the play. And if he couldn't get the ball out quickly, bad things started to happen. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. If the Steelers, about the Steelers, Christopher Carter. Okay, if I'm off base, let me know. But that's what it kind of feels like to me. And so, look, again, I want to recap how things went, especially if you weren't paying attention in the offseason. So the Vikings had let Sam Darnold walk. Daniel Jones didn't pick their offer, so they were going with J.J. McCarthy. They had traded for Sam Howell in the draft. So they had their quarterback room set up. After the draft, Aaron Rodgers comes a-calling. This is around May. Aaron Rodgers comes a-calling. He approaches the Vikings. This is very important, right? He approaches the Vikings, not the other way around. And he says, I would love to play for you. Kevin O'Connell and Aaron Rodgers are good friends. They're around the same age. They were players together in the NFL. Kevin O'Connell actually saw Rodgers as a mentor to him when O'Connell was a young player trying to make it in the league, and Rodgers was at that point like the Super Bowl winner. It was like around 2010. So they're very close. And so when your good friend, who, by the way, is a 2-time MVP not that long ago, comes a-calling, they gave it a God's honest chance. They sat down, they watched the film, they took a few days, and they ultimately said thanks, but no thanks. That was how this went. So what about the alternate universe where they say, interesting idea. Let's do it. They signed him, right? Aaron Rodgers ain't signing to be a backup. If you do that, you are not having a QB competition. J.J. McCarthy, you are now backup quarterback. Just how it is. Sorry, I know we drafted you 10th overall and you thought you were going to be a starter. You're backup quarterback now. Does he demand a trade? Does he, quietly take that job? Are we saying we're going to try to Jordan Love this, basically? That would be the idea, is we're going to just try to make, literally just say our guy is starting behind Aaron Rodgers just like Jordan Love did, and we're going to do the same thing there. I guess that's the idea. But you are never in any world ever going to see anything of J.J. McCarthy in this season. And maybe you like that because McCarthy struggled in his first 2 games. You don't want that anymore, right? No Carson Wentz, none of this. Do the Vikings have a better team? And I kind of think no. And here's why. Because with the way that the Steelers have failed when they have failed is when the play needs to take a little longer. Aaron Rodgers doesn't buy time like he used to. He has to get that ball out, or then it's like statue mode. And that could not be more antithetical to what Kevin O'Connell wants to be, and has been, no matter how good their quarterback is at it. To a fault, I think. And like a critique I've had of O'Connell pretty consistently has been, you are making your quarterbacks hold the ball too long. And some of them hold the ball too long on top of that on their own and compound the problem. And I think Sam Darnold was a little bit of that. J.J. McCarthy was definitely that. And Carson Wentz is that in his own very weird way. And all of them have brought that problem as well. But you don't have a quarterback who can buy time. You must become a quick offense. And the Steelers have adapted to that very well. I do not trust Kevin O'Connell to do that, much as he is the QB whisperer. I don't trust Kevin O'Connell to make that decision at all. He has forced everybody who has ever come into this building to be like a shot play quarterback, no matter what their skill set is. So I would kind of look at this version of an offense, and then I think about putting Aaron Rodgers on it, and I go, my God, a match made in hell. What a terrible idea that would have been. And that was what I thought at the time too, that it was a terrible idea. I think for reasons that turned out to be wrong, that I just thought less of Aaron Rodgers than what he's been able to do in Pittsburgh. And so while I was wrong there, I still feel the same way now, but for a different reason. And I feel pretty confident in that it wouldn't have been very good. And then you would have been basically square peg in a round hole. Season would go totally kaput for different reasons. You would have a frustrated Aaron Rodgers breaking apart your locker room like what happened in New York. And then the young quarterback would have to take over in 2026, dealing with questions about why haven't you played in 2 years? Why did the Vikings go with this disaster instead of you? How bad really are you? I really think that is a worse version than what we're dealing with now, where like the Vikings haven't chosen anybody over JJ McCarthy. They've chosen healthier players over an unhealthy JJ McCarthy, but they have not, since Darnold left, taken anybody. They had parried away every other thing. The one idea, and this is one that doesn't get talked about enough, that I think they could have definitely done is Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco called the Vikings and said, I would love to play for you. He ended up taking a $4 million deal with the Browns. The Vikings could have done that and had a better backup situation. Now, when he called, they had Sam Howell and Brett Rippon ostensibly competing for the job, and they hadn't seen any of camp yet, so they didn't know yet how bad that was going to be, but that adds another self-scouting error that brings me into what we really should regret about the Vikings offseason is like kind of everything else. I don't have regrets about the Vikings going to JJ McCarthy. I think I'll hear the argument about Sam Darnold for sure, but like, hey, man, they would have had to pay him, commit to him for 3 years, and essentially leave the young QB thing off. And you would have once again had an expensive quarterback with a bozo streak and hoping that bozo streak just doesn't show up in the playoffs and that it wins you a Super Bowl with a roster that you're going to have to build around his contract. That sounds very similar to the Kirk Cousins dynamic to me. He's a much different quarterback, but it would have led you to a similar kind of team and a similar expectation. So like, personally, I'm not going to cry too much about it, but I get it if you're looking at him playing like an MVP and saying, whoa, what could have been? Daniel Jones, I don't think would have been the same fit either. I think what they're doing in Indy with him and Shane Steichen is a much better fit than what Minnesota was, and Aaron Rodgers is that to a great degree. But Joe Flacco would have been a backup. He would not have been the starter. This would have just been a better Carson Wentz situation. And I think with better quarterbacking, the Vikings could have gone 4-1 or 3-2 through this stretch of backup quarterback play. That one, they probably could have said yes to, especially if they had known how bad Sam Howell was. But they didn't know it yet, and they made him their backup not knowing that he was bad, and that's a mistake we can critique them for. But the real regrets come when you think about all the talent they had in the building that they let out. And I'm not talking about free agents that they chose not to pay because that comes with a cost. We're talking about players that already were in the building, like Harrison Phillips. Mekhi Blackmon to a much lesser degree, but would have liked a little bit of extra help in the secondary. To some degree, Cam Bynum, but again, they would have had to pay him more, and he took that job in Indy, but we are missing him, I think. I think Theo Jackson has not been up to par. Those are the kinds of things that I think we are regretting. That the Vikings had a roster and a plan going into week one. That plan got punched in the mouth, especially when your QB got injured, and they've changed quite a bit about that plan, mostly for the worse. They've decided to be a multiple D tackles on the field kind of team, even though none of those guys can play nose tackle and stop the run. They've been a much less blitz happy team than they were before, in part because they've taken their like Ivan Pace guys out of the rotation. On offense, they have been a much more pre-snap motion fake toss kind of deception team rather than just a run routes, get open, be a good receiver core kind of team. And walking into week one, the plan was obvious and the plan was there, but they've abandoned it because things have gone so wrong with their injuries and with other stuff that they've had to essentially come up with new stuff on the fly and completely throw away training camp. That has destroyed them. And what they can do now, headed into this next week and into the rest of the season, is reclaim who they were supposed to be. Go do what you thought you were doing at the outset. Now that you're a little healthier, right? Darrisaw's back. Brian O'Neill ostensibly is back. JJ McCarthy is back. This is now what you worked on in camp. Hopefully you get Ryan Kelly back soon too. This is what you worked on in camp. Go do what you worked on in camp. rather than the weird backup version of things that doesn't work anymore. This Chargers game was always coming. This was an inevitability with the way that they have approached the season so far. When you abandon your identity like that, the blowout is happening. Take it as the warning shot that it is and rediscover how to be who you are. Tomorrow, mailbag. Give me your questions. Google form is in the show notes. I'll see y'all for that. And as always, Skol.